Check. Good morning and welcome to Sunday School at Revival Fire Ministries. Today we're going to be actually looking at the topic of faith and encouragement. We're going to start with a story. Amen, said Lucius in unison with his church brothers. He felt better for having asked to meet with his church leader, Elder Price, who had also asked the prison ministry leader, Brother Curtis, to sit in. Lucius has been scared that he was about to be fired. He had been working full-time as a mechanic at Larry's Automotive for 18 months. You have the page? Okay. We're on January 21st. Excuse us. Lucius had been out of prison for 4 years, but had not been able to get a full-time employment until Larry's Automotive. His jail record had slammed many doors in his face. Lucius had been good with cars before he'd been locked up for 6 years, 4 months, and 13 days. Brother Curtis had suggested that Lucius take auto mechanic classes. It had taken a while, but Lucius had achieved his goal of becoming a certified automotive technician. Now he was about to be fired for allegedly stealing things from the shop. But why would he throw everything he had worked for away by stealing money and tools? Surveillance cameras, Lucius repeated Elder Price's question. Larry's is a small shop, but we do great work and have lots of loyal customers. There are cameras on the outside, but not on the inside. Larry was meeting individually with auto techs. Lucius's meeting was tomorrow, Monday morning. Don't be afraid, my brother. God has gone before you, said Elder Price. He has already been fighting your battle. Thanks, said Lucius. I believe it. I will text you both with the good news. This is the idea here of projecting negativity on a situation. And unfortunately, we as human beings are used to that. It was an old saying growing up, I remember. Plan for pre, prepare for post. Okay? You plan for, pre-tribulation. You pray for pre-tribulation. You plead with God for pre-tribulation. But you plan just in case. You're going to end up staying around. And that's the idea of doubt. That idea takes away from the strength of standing on the word and believing in faith. And we're going to look at that. We're going to actually look at this in a story, one of my favorite stories in the Bible, about King Jehoshaphat. In fact, it's such a favorite one, I used to sing a song about it. Now, just some background information. King Jehoshaphat was the fourth king of the southern tribe of Judah after the kingdom was divided between Judah and Israel. The king's job was to lead God's people to follow God's law. 2 Corinthians 17:3 says that King Jehoshaphat was a good king, and the Lord was with him because he walked in the ways of King David and not according to the practices of Israel. If you do a study on the kings of Israel and Judah, you'll find Israel had not one good king after it divided. Israel had not one good king. Judah had 8 out of all their kings that followed the ways of the Lord. Nevertheless, Jehoshaphat made a mistake of establishing a marital alliance with Israel's evil king Ahab. Jehoshaphat repented and reformed Judah's practices after being rebuked by the Lord through Jehu, the seer, for the alliance. And that is in 2 Chronicles 19:2. 2 Chronicles 20 tells a story of a time shortly after these reforms when Judah's faith was tested again. This time they put their faith in God instead of putting their faith in an ungodly alliance with Israel. Jehoshaphat led the people to put their faith in the Lord, and that's what we're going to look at today. If I could have somebody read 2 Chronicles chapter 20, verses 13 through 17, somebody who could preferably see. Inside joke. Just turn on the mic, please.
Second Chronicles 20, 13 through 17, King James Version. And all Judah stood before the Lord with their little ones, their wives, and their children. Then upon Jehaziel, the son of Zechariah, and the son of Beniah, the son of Jael, the son of Mahatna, a Levite of the son of Asaph, came the Spirit of the Lord in the midst of the congregation. And he said, Hearken ye all Judah, and ye inhabitants of Jerusalem, and thou King Jehoshaphat. Thus saith the Lord unto you, Be not afraid nor dismayed by reason of this great multitude, for the battle is not yours, but God's. Tomorrow ye go ye down against them. Behold, they come up by the cliff of Ziz, and ye shall find them at the end of the brook before the wilderness of Jeruel. Ye shall not need to fight in this battle. Set yourselves, stand ye still, and see the salvation of the Lord with you, O Judah and Jerusalem. Fear not, not be dismayed, nor be dismayed. To, tomorrow go out against them, for the Lord will be with you.
Okay, now, the first thing I want to say is, in this case with this story, you want to take the time to read all of Second Chronicles 20. Okay, because there's a lot of setup work, which I'll discuss during the lesson, that you need to see in those 12 verses beforehand. Now, when Jehoshaphat of Judah, King Jehoshaphat, received the news that a vast army, big army, which is in 2 Chronicles 20, verse 2, of Moabites and Ammonites from the other side of the Dead Sea in Edom was coming to make war against Judah, his immediate response was to seek the Lord. You see this in verses 5 through 12 of 2 Chronicles 20. Instead of putting his faith in earthly alliances, as he had done before with the evil king Ahab of Israel, see 2 Chronicles 18:1, Jehoshaphat led the people to put their faith in the Lord. Now, while everyone was assembled before the temple, the king led the people in a prayer for God's help. Jehoshaphat recognized that the Lord is the God of all creation, who rules over all kingdoms of the earth, that he is the one who drove out the enemies of Israel and gave them the promised land, and finally, that God's people are weak and powerless against the great multitude coming to war against them. Therefore, Jehoshaphat and the people entrusted their future to God. 2 Chronicles chapter 20, verse 9. Okay, how many times do we, and I know I'm as guilty of this as anybody, get into a situation where there's just no options, there's no way around, okay? The rock is on one elbow and the hard place is on the other, and the elbows are coming together. And it's at that moment that we seek God. Not when you see the rock, half a mile down the road and the hard place is still, good 120, 140 feet back of you. We always try to find every which way we can to figure it out. Jehoshaphat hit his knees first. And he did it in the midst of the people of Judah, which meant that he humbled himself amongst his people. He led the people on his knees. He was a servant king, and the people honored him because of it. All the people of Judah stood before the Lord, including the men and their wives and children. The writer states that all the men of Judah stood there before the Lord, verse 13. The great number present before the Lord in his dwelling place, the temple, indicates that the entire nation was seeking the Lord's face. This wasn't an optional thing, okay? And this wasn't a lockdown situation where there was a disease going through. Everybody willingly followed. As the entire nation stood before the Lord, he graciously responded through the mouth of Jehazel, a Levite and a descendant of Asaph. Verse 14. The Lord's response was that he would take care of the battle. It was not theirs to fight. The battle is not yours, but God's. Okay. Now, this type of battle, okay, in the notes here they give me in the teacher's guide, they talked about the idea of a jihad war, which for some belief systems, some religions, is a holy war. In the Bible, a holy war is God's to fight, not ours. We do not determine it's a holy war to fight. God decides it, and God takes up the battle. And all we have to do is to pick up the weapons we're assigned to, which is the shield of faith, the sword of the Spirit, put on the helmet of salvation, and hit your knees and pray. That is the definition of a holy war. The people of Judah would show their faith in God by doing three things. First, they had to march out to face the enemy and take positions opposite them. Second, that would show their determination and faith, regardless of what happened. Second, they were to stand firm in those positions. Verse 17. If they did, they would see the Lord deliver them. And third, they were to show no signs of fear and discouragement, remembering instead the most important thing about the upcoming battle: the Lord will be with you. They did exactly what they were told to do. They stood against the enemy. Now, mind you, there was no way there was enough Judeans to fight this battle. In fact, there was really not enough. It was ridiculously not enough. I mean, we were looking at crushing defeat here. And yet they were to stand across from the enemy and say and do nothing else. When was the last time you stood across from an enemy with all their rigmarole and all their bravado and all their chutzpah? Nice Yiddish term. And all you were told to do was stand still, be silent, and watch God do it. I don't care what anybody says. That is, no matter how many times you do it, is some of the hardest things to do. Because you get riled up. Because your enemy's sitting there saying, who the heck do you think you are? Look at you. You think you're some toughie? Huh? I can make you like nothing. I can make you dust. And all you're called to do is stand. Good luck. But the reason why they could stand, because they remembered the Lord will be with you. And they had that knowledge. Now, on that idea of standing, 3 times in verse 20, which we're going to read in a second, King Jehoshaphat uses the Hebrew word aman, A-M-A-N, which means to stand firm. It's related to the more popular Hebrew word amen. So be it. His message could be translated, stand firm in God and you will stand. Often our vision of the future is nearsighted. We only see the present troubles if we have spiritual 2020 vision, 2 Chronicles 20:20, we will more clearly see that standing firm in God is the only way to look at it and face the future. Let's look at verses 18 to 20. If I could have somebody read that. Yes.
Second Chronicles 20:18-20, King James Version. And Jehoshaphat bowed his head with his face to the ground, and all Judah and the inhabitants of Jerusalem fell before the Lord, worshiping the Lord. And the Levites of the children of the Kohathites and of the children of the Kohathites stood up to praise the Lord, God of Israel, with the loud voice on high. And they rose in the morning and went forth into the wilderness of Tekoa. And as they went forth, Jehoshaphat stood and said, Hear me, O Judah, and ye inhabitants of Jerusalem. Believe in the Lord your God, so shall he be established. Believe his prophets, so shall ye prosper.
Okay. Now, when the people first gathered before the temple of God, they didn't know how God would respond. Nevertheless, the people of Judah knew that their only hope was found in God alone. Remember, as we read earlier, they tried it the other way. It didn't work. So they knew they had to trust God. Back then, there weren't many options. So the reader can imagine how pleasantly surprised Judah was when God responded favorably. As soon as the people heard the voice of the Lord, their faith was shown in two further responses: worship and obedience. And we see that in verses 19 and 20. First, their worship is demonstrated in the fact that Jehoshaphat bowed down with his face to the ground. That's in verse 18. All of Judah followed Jehoshaphat's worshipful prostration as they also fell down in worship. All of Judah was in such awe and wonder that God would deliver them from such a dire and hopeless situation. Further, two clans of the Levites from Kohath and Korah, led the people in praise and sang with a very loud voice. Verse 19. Second, Judah was obedient to do exactly what God had commanded them to do. Consider how desperate the people of Judah were when they heard a great army was coming against them. Judah knew that they had no choice, no chance to fight the battle against this army in their own power. Their only hope was to put their faith in God. After God promised to fight their battle, Judah's faith led them to obedience. For the next day they obeyed God's command to go, and early in the morning they left. Verse 20. Now, in earthly terms, Judah was on a death march. How many times have we been in positions where we felt like it was a death march? We will walk into it and we knew there's just no way. I am done. This is it. Yeah. Is the casket paid up? Is the plot paid up? Do I have the funeral arrangement? I'm done. That's it. Yeah. They were headed towards a great army that was much more powerful than their own. Yet Judah had faith in God, inspired by King Jehoshaphat, who cried out, "Have faith in the Lord your God, and you will be upheld. Have faith in his prophets, and you will be successful." And that's verse 20. It was the people's faith in God that ultimately allowed them to triumph over their enemies. They were willing to do what God said, and as a result, God answered. Many times we expect God to answer, but we're not listening for the instructions. Okay? Does that mean God can't work? No, but sometimes, to use the example with Lazarus, Jesus could have raised Lazarus from the tomb, but he was waiting for them to move the stone. They had to follow the instruction to see the result. Same here. They had to go out and stand in their faith to see God work. In the battle itself, Judah took no part at all. All they did was stand. They didn't bring out their lounge chairs. They didn't bring their popcorn machine and their soda machine, to sit down and say, "Let's watch this happen. Oh, goody." This was just standing. Stand and see the salvation of the Lord. And that's what was happening. God defeated the army by by turning the Moabites and Ammonites on themselves and causing them to destroy one another. We see that, we're going to see that in verse 23. When the army of Judah arrived to fight, they found only dead bodies lying on the ground. Verse 24. God did everything. Judah didn't even have to lift a sword. I like it this way. They didn't even have to lift a finger. Okay? God sent confusion in the enemy's camp. And look what happened. When we allow God to take up his position, he will send in battle plans and strategies that in our minds will never work. But he will make sure they're done to the extent that it will cause the enemy to fall apart. Okay? And we just have to be willing to stand, to have faith, and to keep our cotton pinky fingers off of the situation. And that is the hardest thing for us to do. Because, well, we know better. I know how to do it. God, you know what? I got this one. God's like, no, you don't. You're just going to make a bigger mess of it. Hold on. Stay back. Let me handle it. And we have to learn how to hold back. Now, we don't live in a conventional theocracy where we should expect the Lord to fight America's battles. However, we must put our faith in God and trust him to fight our spiritual battles we could never win in our own strength. God is pleased when his people rightly understand they are powerless to fight their own battles. Jehoshaphat and the people of Judah accurately interpreted their circumstances when they confessed that we have no power to face this vast army that is attacking us. We do not know what to do, but our eyes are on you. And they said that in verse 12 of 2 Chronicles 20. The Apostle Paul encouraged the church in Ephesus to rightly understand that their fight is not against flesh and blood, but against the rulers, against the authorities, against the powers of this dark world, and against the spiritual forces of evil in the heavenly realms. And that's in Ephesians 6:12. Paul clarified that the only way to fight this battle is with the armor of God, including the shield of faith that gives God's people the ability to extinguish the flaming arrows of the evil one. In the same way that Judah put their faith in God to fight their battle for them, we must entrust our spiritual battles to the Lord. Now, another interesting little feature here. The phrase "no fear," okay, or it's like the "do not fear, fear not," etc. It appears in the Bible, depending on which version you use, approximately 365 times. I heard one minister say, it shows up 365 times, so God's telling you fear not for every day of the year. And it's only one day of the year, one day every 4 years, where you have to trust God where he doesn't tell you that. It could be said that there's one scripture per day to remind us not to be fearful. In 2 Timothy 1:7, we are told that God did not give us a spirit of fear. Therefore, God desires us to trust him instead of being afraid or fearful. Many would say that the opposite of faith is fear. And it's very easy for us to fear because we have 20/20 physical sight, when we really need 20/20 spiritual sight to see what God is doing, to see how God is going to move. Now, mind you, yes, we all know sometimes he don't tell us because we have a tendency of trying to get in the middle of it and mess it up big time, royally. We're experts at messing things up. If we weren't, we'd be perfect. We wouldn't be here. But we need to realize many times that when God is working, He doesn't show us that he's working. Sometimes we have to just say, God, I know you're doing something in the midst of this, and wait on him until he either tells you it is done and shows you the completion, or he tells you that it's time for you to move and do something. But the one word we hate to hear God say is stand. Because stand corroborates with another four-letter word that we hate: wait. Oh, I hate when I hear that. Wait. No, wait. The rock hard place, elbows. Wait. Be at peace. And you have to remember that God's view is much higher than ours. He sees the whole chessboard of history. We only see the square we're in. We only know that we can move one way, and we can't even see which way to move sometimes. I don't know how many, God must be healing my head every night, because I don't know how many doors I've bumped my head into that I thought were open that weren't, or how many walls I've run into spiritually. But God keeps saying, wait, relax. I got this. I got you. And then we have to remember what it says in Psalm 139:16, that there's a book written with our life. God knew before our parents were a twinkle in our grandparents' eye what we would need to get through. And sometimes that is the hardest thing to do. That will drive you mad at times. Oh, you'll come to church with a smile on your face. Hello. But remember, there are times when we Christians are ducks. Everything looks good on the surface, but those feet underwater are paddling like crazy. We are going nuts. We need to stay above the water and stay cool. Let the water wash off our backs. Don't worry about it. Just relax. I'm preaching to myself right now. I'm saying, relax. Do you see what I'm going through? Like, God's like, no, I'm taking care of something on the other side of the world. I can't be two places at once. Sometimes we say the stupidest things. We're in the middle of something. Yeah, and we get done and we're sitting there and God's like, okay, see what I meant? See what I did? And you sit there and you say, God, can you forgive me for the stupid that I did before? Fortunately, we have a God that understands. He says, yes, I forgive you. And then he'll put us in something else to test to see if we meant what we said when we asked for forgiveness. Because it's a never-ending process. But the thing is, it should get easier to stand. It should get easier to say, God, you got this. And I'm moving. I got you my next mission you've assigned me. You take care of that part. We need to take the battles we're in and, just like Jehoshaphat, turn them into holy wars. Turn them into those wars that God takes care of, and all we do is stand and say, what do you need from me, God? What do you want? What do I got to do? You're fighting this. I'm not. I'm the lowly private here. You general, you fight. I know fight. I just do. And when we start getting that vision, then we fall in line and our faith grows. And that's when you start getting promoted. Unfortunately, nobody tells you this, so I'm going to give you a secret right now. As you get promoted, the battles get harder. And the problem is, sometimes we got to remember when we were private and just stand. I am not dealing with this battle. And we also need to recognize not to take on the battles we're not assigned to. Because, man, as Christians, we don't want the battles we're supposed to fight, but, man, we'll take somebody else's battle on, no problem. And then we wonder why we're going through all this problems and all this hell and everything. Well, that's because you took on something you weren't supposed to take on. Take a chill pill, relax, say, God, you take care of it, and move on. Okay? Don't take on the battles you're not supposed to do. I learned that a long time ago, very long time ago, when everything was going crazy, or I thought was crazy at the time. It wasn't. It was just me over-dramatizing everything. But God says, this is happening because you took on your friend's battle. I'm like, but God, aren't we supposed to pray for one another? He says, yes, pray for them, and then move on. Don't try to move my hand, because what my friend wanted was not what God wanted. And so I had to say, God, your will be done, and back off. And turn off my phone so that my friend wouldn't call me crying every 5 minutes because he was going through hell. That is the problem sometimes. We don't know when not to answer the phone. Especially nowadays, we got caller ID, you know. It's like, oh no, he's calling again. Hold on. You know what? I'm busy. But it was answered. And the answer required God to change him before he could give him the answer. Yeah, sure, go ahead. Please.
When you were talking, you made me think of the fact of we have to just show up.
Mm-hmm.
They showed up for the battle,
Yes.
trusting God.
Yep.
And sometimes we don't just show up. Fear will keep us. You know, there's sometimes that you'll hear apostle say, well, did you go such and such? No. Did you do such and such? No. And it's through the action that we're going to see God move. Because if you don't act if you don't go, you don't show up, you don't make the phone call, you don't go see the people, how is God going to deliver or do what he said he's going to do?
If you don't move the stone, how is Lazarus going to get out of the tomb? God doesn't need us to move the stone, but he wants us to move the stone. God doesn't need us to make the phone call, but he wants us to make the phone call, or whatever it is. We have to realize that standing is not just standing. Standing requires action. First of all, the action is to stand. It is a verb. Verbs have movement. Yeah, you don't see much movement, but it requires an action, because in all honesty, there are lots of times when God says, just stand, and we want to do everything else that we know what to do, and we want to cry, and God says, no, just stand. Stop for a second. And sometimes in that standing, God gives us a battle plan. Or God, when we stand, God will release an idea to a prophet who will call us and say, God's telling me to tell you, do this. And usually it is the most absurd idea we can think of, at least in the beginning. There's just no way. They rejected you for a job. Well, call them back. What do you mean call them back? They just sent me a letter saying that. Call them back. They made a mistake, and you just have to call. I'm not going to call. Hold on, get the microphone. We want the people online to hear you, because we know. Turn it on.
I was just thinking when you said stand, and you said that it's a verb, like it's an action. So even though when we stand, it doesn't really look like we're doing anything, but in order to stand, you have to get up.
Bingo.
You have to get up in order to stand. So sometimes our standing is us getting up and standing, waiting for direction, waiting for instruction. Or like you said, for instance, if it's a job and they denied you, standing means stand and call them back. Get up. Like you were hit and you fell down by the rejection, but now it's time to get up. So in order to stand, you need to get up. So I thought of that when you said that came to mind.
God just brought back to mind a memory of a job that I had. At one point, I was working for a rather large nonprofit sports company. And they had advertised the position. And I call this my Moses moment, because I saw the advertisement online on the job boards. And I said, that's interesting. And it took me 30 days to apply for the job. It took a while for it to get up here. But the funny thing is, my wife was even saying, what do you think? Do you think it's real? Because how many job boards, they post jobs, and they're not real jobs, you know. So I said, and at this point, we were getting ready to move from my mother-in-law's house up to here, to this area. So I'm like, well, how far is it? And, you think of everything, every detail. And then finally, I applied for it. And that was around Thanksgiving. It took them 3 weeks to get back to me to say, okay, we'd like to interview you. And I'm like, okay. I go in, suit, tie, the whole 9 yards. Do the whole horse and pony show. Oh, I have this background, this background, this background. Okay. You know what? We're going to call you in for a second interview. Like, okay. I come in, and now I'm seeing the director. And I'm like, God, and I always pray this before I apply for any job. Lord, if this is not of you, don't even let them get back to me. I don't want to waste my time. I don't want to spin my wheels. I don't like the suits and ties, and I don't want to do this, God. So if it's you, make it happen. And I did not feel this job. But I said, God, you got this under control. You do it. And I walked in for the second interview. Now I'm sitting there with two managers and the director. And I'm going through all the questions and everything. And I'm like, like you're in an interview, you're like a little tense. Then they asked me one question that told me I got the job. They said, are you used to speaking in front of people? And at that point, and the funny thing is, the director she said, after I was hired, she says, I saw your face. All you did when I asked you that question was lean back, put your hands on your chest, and answered. She says, at that moment, I hired you. And all I said is, I'm a minister. I'm used to getting up in front of hundreds of people and preaching. To teach this stuff, it's easy. No problem. I got this. But God, I got news for you. God throws a really nasty slider. That was December, just before Christmas. Little did I know that they took off from Christmas to New Year's. And they had a major software rollout going on. So most of the month of January, the managers weren't going to be around. So it took them 4 weeks to get back to me to say, you got the job. Let us just say I was not the calmest duck on the pond. But I still floated, and God gave us the job. And I started the job 2 weeks after we moved up here. Because my old job, when I handed in the resignation, they said, well, you know what? Pack up your stuff. You can go now. And my first day on the new job, I ended up getting a fever. I had to go home early anyway. I mean, Satan was really throwing stuff at me, but it was one of the best jobs I ever had. Because I stood. Because I had the faith to believe. And because I let God do the battle. And God when you let God do the battle, at one point or another, He will show you He's got this. He will show you somewhere where He says, this is yours, don't worry about it. Here, let me show you how much this is yours. Boom. Now, here's an interesting story, and we're going to close with this story. Death at 68. Everyone celebrated Stephanie's 68th birthday except Stephanie. Fear stopped her from enjoying her birthday because she was obsessed with dying. Certainly she would die in her 68th year of life. Like not going to her birthday party was going to stop year 68. Her mother and sister-in-law died at 68. Her thoughts about her pending death consumed her. Stephanie lived in fear her whole 68th year. She thought she may die in an accident, so she refused to go to places with her children and grandchildren. She indulged in her favorite foods in case this would be her last chance to eat them. She even wrote her obituary and planned her own funeral. What a happy person to be around. Stephanie's 69th birthday arrived, and she still feared that death was near. But this time, her daughter, Jasmine, noticed her lack of peace on her birthday. As she asked her mom about her feelings, Jasmine discovered her fear of death, and her daughter didn't invalidate her fears, but told her to get her Bible. Jasmine lovingly had her mother read Matthew chapter 6, verses 25 through 34, and discussed with her how much God cared for her. Then Jasmine asked her mom to read God's instructions about tomorrow in verse 34. And Stephanie read, "Therefore, do not worry about tomorrow, for tomorrow will worry about itself. Each day has enough trouble of its own." Jasmine reminded her mom how much God loves her and wants her to give him her anxieties and fears. Stephanie asked God to help her not fear death and learn to enjoy each day with gratitude. Gradually, Stephanie had less and less fear of dying and was able to enjoy her next 7 birthdays with her family and friends. She lived one day at a time, knowing God was there every step of the way. We need to look at our foolish fears that seem to be real to us and let them filter through the Word of God. See what God has in store. We can't worry about tomorrow. Who's going to be at the door? What's going to come in the mail? How am I going to pay this bill? How am I going to pay that bill? We just have to worry about today. We have great ability to project fear into days that we have no control over, nor days that we do not even know what's in them. Because that day you fear might be the day when God finally gives you the answer. And all God's waiting for you to do is to say, I have the faith to believe, thus I will not fear. And when we do that, it's when we see the salvation of the Lord. You want to see the results? Like I said, go back to 2 Chronicles chapter 20. Keep reading about the story of Jehoshaphat. Man, the people of Judah ended up pillaging the countryside where these armies were. It took them 3 days to haul back all the plunder. And as they were doing it, they were saying, "Praise ye the Lord, his mercy endures forever and ever." We need to remember, our plunder is just one step of faith away. All we have to do is have the faith to stand and wait for God to say, now move. If you were blessed by today's Sunday school lesson, we would ask you to, if possible, please, you give an offering. Let me get this up a little bigger. You can give an offering online using either our text-to-give system, which is 610-778-9933. You can also use Cash App at $RevivalFireMin2. You can use PayPal at paypal.me/RevivalFireMin. Or you can also scan the codes for Square Pay, Apple Pay, and Google Pay. We want to thank you for joining us today. And we ask that you stay online and watch for our service beginning at 11:30 this morning. And then join us once again for Bible study on Thursday night, as well as we have our morning word at 7 a.m. with Prophet Jesse. And we hope to see you again next week for Sunday school. God bless. Have a wonderful week.